mysterious story.
Number 10. Good morning, Vietnam. Throughout the time of the Vietnam War, it was extremely difficult for American soldiers to distinguish between an innocent villager and a member of the enemy Viet Cong organization. One of the most common ways to get someone to reveal their true identity was to shock them using high-powered EA-312 military phones. Soldiers would hook two wires to the phone and run them to various regions of the prisoner's body to do this. The phone has a crank on the side that troops would normally use to make the phone ring. If it was connected to a person's body, nevertheless, it would simply send a massive jolt of electricity directly through them. Extremely sensitive parts like the tongue, nipples, and genitals were frequently connected up and fried. One soldier claimed that delivering these shocks to another living person for up to 3 or 4 hours at a time was not unusual. Unless the Vietnamese prisoner had not admitted by then, that suggested they were most likely sinless. Soldiers humorously referred to this sort of torture as the Bell Telephone Hour, after a popular musical program from the 1950s. The Vietnamese eventually discovered how to do it as well, and it became yet another tool in their arsenal for torturing American prisoners. Number 9. The pair of anguish. They used this cruel device on women accused of adultery or abortion, as well as anyone accused of bringing dishonor to their religion in general. 3 or 4 huge metal panels in the shape of a spoon are located at the bottom of the pair. It seems that each of these panels opens in a different direction, similar to the petals of a flower. They initially inserted the pair into the anus or genitals while still closed. The torturer would then turn a massive screw at the end of the pair, causing the panels to expand. The agony must have been excruciating when their soft tissue ripped apart and their horrific injury widened. The confessor, like the Judas cradle, thumbscrews, and iron chair, is left to make a decision that how long the torture will last. Number 8. The heretic's fork. They used this device in the Middle Ages to elicit confessions without actually taking the life of someone, although many people wished they had been killed at the end of it all. The heretic's fork was essentially a long bar with sharp prongs on both ends. A leather strap was used to wrap it around the victim's neck. These prongs pierced the person's chest as well as under their chin. The prongs would severely prod them back into a straight posture if they attempted to be in a state of sleep or dropped their chin for any other reason. The heretic's fork was frequently forced to be worn for days on end. They got increasingly fatigued when the encounter progressed and was capable of making a confession. Number 7. Confessions from a dirty rat. A caged rat and a controlled flame are used in this confession method. A rat is placed in a person's stomach, chest, or genitals before being quickly covered with a round metal lid. The lid is then heated by holding a fire to it. When the rat detects heat, it panics and begins to bite and claw its way downwards into the victim's flesh in order to get away. Usually, a person was too preoccupied with yelling to get their confession out before the rodent excavated itself deep inside them. Another variation of this method requires tying a person down and allowing starving rats to nibble away at their body until they confess to whatever they were accused of. In a third version, the accused is still required to put on a special iron device on their head. The mask is designed to bear resemblance to the head of a pig. A single starving rat waits inside the mask's snout, at the back of a small gate. When the gate is opened, the hungry rat rushes down the snout into the mask's main chamber, clawing and biting at the poor person's face until a proper confession is eventually carried out. Number 6. Torture shoes. They designed these huge and heavy iron shoes to quickly elicit confessions from anyone unfortunate enough to be compelled to put on them. Unlike a typical pair of shoes, which keep the foot level, these shoes were tilted in such a way that a person had to stand uncomfortably on their tiptoes. If they became fatigued and attempted to put their heels down, massive iron spikes behind the shoe would spike them in the foot. Despite the fact that other designs did not have any prongs, they were not capable of bending easily. Wearing these hard iron boots immediately became a popular form of torture from which individuals would say anything to escape. Number 5. Thumbscrews. Throughout the time of the Middle Ages, this type of torture was common. They place a person's fingers or toes inside a primitive vice grip with a handle on top. This handle allowed the interrogator to tighten the screws and progressively crush a victim's digits as he liked. This may be done rapidly or gradually over days, weeks, or even months until a confession was carried out. The elbows, knees, and feet were eventually pulverized by a larger version. When it comes to the head crusher, all a person can do is scream as their jaws, teeth, and skull are all pushed together and broken at a far too slow pace for anyone to bear. Number 4. Judas Cradle. It appears that the Judas Cradle is a tiny pyramid with a razor-sharp tip that was used in the most heinous way imaginable. To begin, the person accused of a crime has their arms and legs tied to ropes and suspended high in the air. They are then gradually lowered onto the point of the Judas Cradle. It was up to the torturer to decide whether the pyramid destroyed their genitals or anus. There is no doubt that the weight of their bodies pushes the Judas Cradle deeper and deeper into their wound. In this manner, a single interrogation had the ability to last for hours or even days. Despite the fact that this technique almost always resulted in a confession, few people who had to experience a difficult situation survived for long. Number 3. Water interrogations. Throughout the years, several confession procedures have used the use of water in the most heinous manner possible. Victims have been forced to consume a large number of liquids through a funnel at various periods throughout history. After that, they are compelled to confess in order for everything to end, else, their insides would have bloated and burst. Normally, despite the fact that water is being used in this process, urine and other filthy liquids are sometimes substituted. Water interrogations were employed in Europe centuries ago to determine whether or not someone was a witch. If a person was suspected of witchcraft, the locals would wrap stones around them and throw them into a lake. If they ascended to the top, it meant they were a witch in disguise. However, if they sank to the bottom, it proved they were sinless. Because a rope was usually put around a person's waist, they could be dragged back to shore, but there wasn't much that could be done if the rope was too long or if the rope broke before they got back to land. In some way, the people of Europe never realized how everyone always appeared to be sinless. They had a long history of believing in witches. Chinese water torture is yet another centuries-old confessional practice. For this procedure, a single drop of water is continuously thrown at a person's head in the same spot. Despite the fact that this is mildly irritating at first, the sensation quickly escalates until a person either confesses or goes nuts. It seems that each drop becomes heavier than the last until it becomes excruciatingly painful. It is believed that if it is left on for a long enough period of time, it can drill a hole straight through the skin. Waterboarding has certainly become one of the most talked about types of water-based interrogation in recent years. It appears that a person is laid down at an angle with a cloth over their face during a waterboarding technique. As water is flown on the cloth, their bodies experience sudden muscular contractions and they feel as if they are drowning. Number 2. The iron chair. Even though the iron chair was a medieval chair covered in spikes long enough to dig into the flesh, short enough to avoid vital organs. In reality, the wound was plugged up by the spikes themselves and they reduced blood loss, allowing the victim to be kept alive for longer. The torturer would occasionally tighten a series of straps that went over a person's hands, chest, and legs. They were pushed deeper into the spikes with each tightening of the strap. In this way, a person could still be survived and be fully awake for hours or even days. However, once they were released and stood up, the blood loss from all of the holes in their bodies usually caused them to pass away within a short period of time. This chair was such a horrifying sight that people would frequently admit to their crimes simply by watching others suffer in it. Number 1. Number 10. No-touch torture. Guantanamo Bay seems to be an American detention facility in Cuba that houses prisoners of war from all over the world. These inmates are subjected to what is described as no-touch torture, which refers to confession procedures that do not include actual physical contact. The ultimate goal is to destabilize a person's mental condition such that they can no longer withhold information. This frequently entails driving them mad in the process. One of the most common forms of no-touch torture used to soften a target is sleep deprivation. It appears that prisoners at Guantanamo Bay are housed in cramped quarters with glaring lights shining down on them at all times. The temperature fluctuates between freezing cold and boiling hot at random, which leaves captives bewildered, confused, and fatigued. At any given time, prisoners are forcibly removed from their small cells and interrogated in an interrogation chamber. And it looks like these no-touch torture questioning sessions can extend a few minutes or several days. This is done to maintain the prisoner in a perpetual state of anxiety and uncertainty. Despite the fact that sometimes the interrogator threatens the prisoner and their family with torture and death unless they confess to being a terrorist, other times they choose a different path entirely. The interrogator might claim, for instance, that there was a catastrophic mistake and that the prisoner should not have been kept here. It is claimed that the prisoner's family is looking forward to meeting them in the next room and that they will be set free soon. Of course, this is merely a psychological game that will never culminate in their actual release. Rather, the no-touch torture is repeated indefinitely until a confession is obtained. It seems that other questioning techniques use a completely different approach. It is normal for an interrogator to make sexual approaches toward a detainee, compel him to watch pornographic videos involving two men, and threaten him with molestation unless they admit it. Some accounts claim that convicts are compulsory to carry out homosexual actions on each other in order to further shatter their spirits and any sense of control they may have had. Generally speaking, dehumanization is prevalent in Guantanamo Bay. Prisoners are frequently required to put on headphones at all times. Despite the fact that this may not appear to be a big deal at first, these headphones can play steady audio streams around the clock that are specifically engineered to drive any regular person mad. These audio loops are typically in the shape of frightening voices that either endlessly yells or sarcastically offer incredibly harsh statements. This causes an internal conflict in the prisoner and significantly agitates them when they are subjected to the same vexing insults over and over. For the same effect, loud noises, unpleasant feedback sounds, or even the same music are played repeatedly. According to documents, prisoners have been forced to listen to the Sesame Street and Barney theme tunes for days at a time. Even they have to use the obnoxious jingle for Meow Mix. Another prevalent practice at Guantanamo Bay is to place the inmates in stress positions. Prisoners are strapped to the floor in ways that cause their arms and legs to bend abnormally, and they are then left to suffer on their own. At first, despite the fact that these positions are just mildly painful, they quickly become excruciating when their limbs fall asleep and pins and needles start to set in. After a while, their limbs start to burn badly when muscles spasm and nerves begin to be injured. Detainees are placed in these stress postures for hours or even days at a time, and they must lay there in dirty jumpsuits until someone returns to torment them in some other way. They are frequently putting on headphones while this also takes place. If a prisoner goes on a hunger strike or becomes too disturbed to eat, they are subjected to a procedure known as rectal rehydration. Despite the fact that this is a huge force-feeding tube that is inserted up the other end rather than through the mouth. According to human rights activists, this is rape, and that it must stop, along with all of the other human rights abuses. It seems that Guantanamo Bay was established immediately after the events of 9/11, and it remains a source of contention to this day. Prisoners can be kept indefinitely without trial, which means they could be subjected to various forms of no-touch torture every day for the rest of their lives. Despite the fact that hundreds of others have been set free, 61 inmates remain behind bars to this day. For more than 10 years, 44 of them have been subjected to non-stop no-touch torture. 9 inmates have passed away due to a result of these measures. Who has an idea what stories they could have told if they were still living? Thanks for checking out this video. Be sure to subscribe because I upload a new video every day. Or if you're still not convinced, here are some of my other videos that I think you'd like. Enjoy.